is The Star Factory by Ciaran Carson and recently recorded for the Book on One by Stephen Rea. The late Ciaran Carson was born in Belfast in 1948. He went on to become one of the leading writers of his generation. His book, The Star Factory, has been described as a wonderfully original self-portrait and portrait of his beloved city. In tonight's opening excerpt, Ciaran's dreamlike memory brings us back to the beginnings of his attraction to stories.
It is cold and dark, and I'm standing facing my father, who is seated on the throne of the outhouse. I am the age where our heads are level with each other. I'm there because I did not want his call of nature to interrupt the story he'd been telling me. So he continues, phrasing it between puffs of smoke, and the red glow of his cigarette end as he draws on it illuminates his face sporadically. Brief looks of dialogue are exchanged before we vanish again, overtaken by the realm of his voice, which extends beyond the cramped dimensions of the outhouse into the space of memory and narrative. As the words unreel from him, his cigarette becomes a visual aid, and its animated lipstick blip draws time-lapse squiggles on the 3D blackboard dark. Or as a continuo between these imaginary pictures, he makes curvy waves of possibility which punctuate or illustrate the story's rhythm and its tendency to gather into ornate runs and turns. I see it like some instant recall hologram in all its cursive loops and spirals of DNA red neon. The writing fades as instantly as it is written, but our two slow brains retain its after-image on our retinas, just as the words of the beginning or a middle section linger on throughout the predetermined narrative. Predetermined, yet always new, because each telling of the story is rehearsal and gains different subtleties of emphasis each time round. The cistern whispering, for example, at some appropriate Cold War moment, or the Niagara's flushing, which signals the end of an important episode where the hero falls into a waterfall. It reminds me of the ancient magisterial importance of the chamber pot, where courtiers and privy councillors await the outcome of His Majesty's deliberations like a plot, and perfumes of Arabia are sprayed discreetly round the room from pomander bulbs squeezed by underpaid underlings. Or one ponders the alternative hologram of the city described by its ubiquity of plumbing and its labyrinthine sewers, the underworld of culverts plunged in Stygian gloom. So as children, we believed that sewer covers were the portals to a parallel sub-universe. Embossed with arcane lettering and numerals, their enormous, thick, cast-iron discs proved impossible to lift. Sometimes, though, boiler-suited emissaries from the corporation would materialise and insert long metal keys with T-shaped handles into the two slots of the submarine hatch, and heave it, trembling from its disturbed circumference of mossy dirt, and we would get a glimpse of ladder rungs descending into well-dark depths. For although much of the world was withheld from us, we had premonitions of its depth and breadth from these occasional insights. Squinting through the eye knot of a creosoted pine fence, for instance, I can see the rusted-strewn sculpture of abandoned factory machinery, all axles, counterweights and cogged wheels. Or, passing by an open pub door in summer, the aroma of warm beer and porter emanates a palpable extension of its nicotined interior, where blurred men speak to mirrors in a tipsy babble. Sometimes the gates and factory porticos were open to admit a Clydesdale drawn cart, and the inner courtyard was revealed like that of a medieval castle, smelling of straw and dung, the rhythm of the horses clopping on the cobbles in their tasselled club-footed hooves, rang out against the opaque noise that beat against the factory windows from within, where I'd imagined doffers slanging to each other in their language of mime, mouthing silently to back up this writing on the air. From here, the Milford weaving and finishing works, I'd walk on down Clonard Street on my way home from school, turn down Odessa Street and Sevastopol Street to emerge at the impressive sandstone facade of the Falls Road branch of the Andrew Carnegie Library. Now I remember the library in some households was a euphemism for once euphemisms like loo and water closet. Contemplating that last antique compound, I'd see water wobbling in the opened mirror door, and I'd step right through its trembling mercury to emerge reversed on the other side, like some ghost from the future, who hover glides invisibly through empty childhood streets just after dawn, following the jiggled tinkle of the milk cart, or a postman coming home from night shift, disembodied from his job of sorting letters into pigeonholes. You could float on board a tram and doppelganger its lone pilot as he exercised his minimal control of stops and starts within the predetermined iron parallels of time. In the still gaslit thoroughfare, fruitmongers were up early, with long poles already drawing out their awnings to shade their produce, fresh and cool from that morning's market. It has occurred to me in these dreams to visit my parents before I was born. Meeting a younger self seemed too improbable, but the dream mechanism always manages to subvert this outcome, and I find myself instead back where I started, listening to my father in the dark of the library of 100 Raglan Street. And as I write in 12 Glandore Avenue, my toilet is a library. Some years ago, I put up 3 mahogany-stained pine shelves on its back wall and filled them with second-hand books that might have once resided in a public library. The Mason Wasps by J.H. Fabre, British Ferns and Their Allies by Thomas Moore, Pharos the Egyptian by Guy Boothby, Rovering to Success, Life Sport for Young Men by Lord Baden-Powell, Kylung's Golden Hours by Ernest Bramah, The Life of the Fly by J.H. Fabre, With Stanley on the Congo by M. Douglas, Laughter and Wisdom by Stephen Leacock, Biggles Flies West by Captain W. E. Johns, The Romance of Fish Life by W. A. Hunter, I Said Oddly, Diddle I by Paul Jennings, Electricians and Their Marvels by Walter Jarrold, More Hunting Wasps by J.H. Fabre. Books chosen for a variety of reasons, for their titles or design, for their illustrations, for nostalgia, sometimes for their content. Sitting on the faux Edwardian commode seat, the occupant is inclined to reach back for a volume, open it, and sniff it, thus releasing dormant pheromones of yellow-glued bindings and foxed paper. Sometimes a pressed flower flutters out, as if emerging from a pupa, and one imagines the nature rambles of long Victorian evenings presided over by a Lewis Carroll figure. Or recently in the pages of the complete poetical works of Robert Service, beautifully produced by Bars & Co. of New York, NY, and Newark, NJ, I came across the visiting card of one the Reverend K.N.J. Lovelace, complete with a coat of arms which bears a remarkable resemblance to that of Belfast, with his 2 rampant seahorses to Belfast's 1. I can hear my father reciting services, the shooting of Dan McGrew, in the whispery dark of the outhouse. A bunch of the boys were whipping it up in the Malamute saloon. The kid that handles the music box was hitting a jagtime tune. Back of the bar in a solo game sat dangerous Dan McGrew, and watching his luck was his light of love, the lady that's known as Lou. And as I sniff again, the book hits me with a rush of brown lino smells that appertain to libraries and doctors' surgeries, where you might see a print of Millet's The Angelus hung above the waiting room mantelpiece, and the dim bronze gongs of St. Peter's waft across the intervening time. I see its soot-encrusted twin spires and all the other neo-Gothic campaniles of Belfast, ubiquitous as factories or barracks. Unbearably tall mill chimneys teetered against the Atlantic grey sky, churning out thick ropes of smoke like fleets of armed destroyers. They bring me back to my mini library where, above the books, I've put a framed reproduction for Will's Woodbine cigarettes, featuring, in the Dardanelles, the five-funnelled Russian destroyer Askold, commonly known as the packet of Woodbines. It reminds me that my father, when he wasn't smoking Park Drive, would smoke Woodbines, which came in leaf green Art Nouveau packets of 5, 10 or 20. My father stopped smoking some years ago, but still carries, it seems to me, an aura of crumbled tobacco dust. These days, when he comes to visit, he spends good half hours in the library, browsing through its relics of an empire. Sometimes he comes down with a book under his arm. Often it is the Belfast Street Directory of 1948, the year that I was born. In the tome of the Street Directory, I look up my first alma mater, St. Gall's Public Elementary School, under Waterville Street, number 2. And I'm reminded how the arbitrary power of the alphabet juxtaposes impossibly remote locations, as in the preceding entry, Waterproof Street, which runs from Fairfax Street to Byron Street in East Belfast, some 3 miles away. Then we have Watson Street off Railway Street, slightly nearer, in the Sandy Row district, in the vicinity of Murray, Sons & Co., tobacco and snuff manufacturers, whose heady aura could be detected sometimes in the schoolyard of St. Gall's, given a western breeze. Like the way we could hear the roar of the crowd at an international fixture in far-off Windsor Park. Similarly, streets named after places form exotic junctures not to be found on the map of the empire. Balkan and Ballarat, Cambrai and Cambridge, Carlisle and Carlow, Lisbon and Lisburn, and so on through Madras and Madrid, till we eventually arrive by way of Yukon at the Isles of Zetland, whereupon we fall off the margins of the city. I'm trying to think of myself as a bookworm, ruminating through the 1,596 pages of the directory in Teredo mode, following my non-linear dictates as I make chambered spirals in my universe, performing parabolas by browsing letters and the blanks between them. I've never seen a bookworm, but I've often glimpsed a tiny lenticular blip of near-transparent yellow, which scuttles from the fold between 2 suddenly opened pages. This, possibly, is the book louse, described in Macmillan's encyclopedia as a soft-bodied, wingless insect, also called the dust louse, belonging to the order Scoptera, about 1,600 species. Book lice inhabit buildings, often feeding on old books, papers, and entomological collections. The directory, indeed, has been much distressed by my metaphorical bookworm expeditions into it over many years. I've repaired its cracked spine and rubbed edges with green carpet tape that in its turn is beginning to come apart. Nevertheless, it remains an impressive piece of book production, measuring 9 by 5 by 3 inches, and bearing embossed advertisements on its 4mm thick boards. Even the page edges of the closed volume carry ads. Wondering how the concave surface was managed, I imagined teams of printers' devils wielding big, convex rubber stamps with doorknob handles. One of these notices is for John Ross & Co., largest auction rooms in Ireland, reminding me that I bought the directory itself in the said rooms, in a job lot consisting of some bric-a-brac, a brownie box camera, and a sheaf of old postcards, 2 of which I'm looking at right now, and whose juxtaposition, when I bought them, seemed to form some mysterious alliance. The first is postmarked Belfast, 3:30 p.m, SP3 13, and bears the address 22 Raby Street, Ormeau Road, Belfast. Its front is an elaborate colour production whose centrepiece is a retouched photograph of a man and woman embracing, cheek by jowl, within a floral border. In the top left corner, a picture of an ocean liner, and in the top right, a steam train, both vehicles surmounted by shamrocks. Below the couple, 2 disembodied hands. One wrist is lace-fringed, the other shirt-cuffed, emerge from bouquets to squeeze each other gently. At the tail of the card, a verse. Until we meet again, parting darkens our sky, alas, but every cloud has a silver lining. Love will brighten the days as they pass, and hope of reunion forbid our repining. The message on the back is written in a fine-nibbed, delicate hand. Dear Jim, how are you living the life on the ocean wave? Have you any vacancies for a galley slave? If so, I will go. How would you like that? I don't think. Mrs. A. Gurley's address is 66 Castlereagh Street, Mount Pottinger. Did you have time to see any of Russia at all? What do you think of it? Is it any better than Belfast? Mr. W. Yeats took a photo of mine, which I intended to send to you, so you can write and ask him for it, as he won't give it to me. It's not a very good one, but it'll do until I get a better one. Was you ever out in a wee boat, or were you ever in Larne? Lovely weather for Browns Bay. What do you say? We all rise in the morning to go for a swim. This is all now, thanking you for PCs received from Falkirk and Russia. Write soon, with kind regards, Gertie. Please excuse card. I am somewhat flummoxed as to how this card reached its destination, since the Raby Street address appears to be that of the sender, and can only surmise that Jim, on the ocean wave, is in the Navy, and that the card was forwarded by some Special Forces mail. The second card bears neither a stamp, date, nor address, but the evidence would suggest that it's been sent by someone serving in the Great War. The front is a conventional landscape scene in an oval frame. The back is printed Luxographie et Noyer, Paris, numéro 55, Fabrication Française, and bears the following message written in indelible pencil. My dearest Gertie, no letter today either, but I don't think it's your fault. I seen in the paper today that P. Barron and McManus of Ballyshannon were both wounded. When is it all going to end? I get tired more and more every day. I think it's thinking of you what makes it worse. I hope that you won't be angry at getting a PC, but honestly it holds more than I have to write. Imagine this few lines to my own pet. I can't think what else to write about. I'm sure, pet, all my letters must be just the same over and over again. I can't help myself. Every day is the same old thing over again, including Sunday. I really don't know Sunday from any other day. I often think, is it going to last forever? This and you, my little darling, is all I can think of night and day. I hope for your sake that when you get this, here the indelible pencil has been heavily rubbed and is illegible. Mother, I was asking for, with all my love, from your very own friend, XXX, children, XXX. It's difficult to imagine two messages more different in tone. Can these two Gerties be one and the same? I think it's possible, but unlikely. Nevertheless, their coinciding in the heterogeneous jumble of an auction room gives me an eerie feeling, as if in retrospect they had been predestined to meet. It reminds us of the poignancy of auction rooms, of vacancy and death, as the contents of a house are held in limbo until sold in disparate lots, and the domiciled relationship they had is broken up. If furniture could speak, what tales might it not tell, when the whatnot is divested of its aspidistra, and the overmantel mirror loses the reflection of its parlour? For every stick and bit implies a narrative, and we ascribe their provenances. So the story goes, as the auctioneer, like a dominie or cleric, climbs into his box to open a new chapter. As a newcomer to auctions, I was fascinated by the skewed incremental scale of bidding. 80, 60, 40, I have 30. 80, 60, 40, I have 30. 32, 35, 40, 42, 45, 47, 50, 55, 60, going up in fives until it hit the 80, and then proceeding in tens. And I admired the accuracy with which the porters could predict, if asked, at what time in the sale a certain lot would come up, and its going price. I'm reminded of the importance of numbers in the street directory. The numbering of tenements in the streets of Belfast is not consecutive, but alternative. One side is marked with odd figures, 1, 3, 5, and so on, and the opposite with evens, as 2, 4, 6, etc., as a head note has it. And now I remember the boy I once knew who collected house numbers. Not for him the logistical and temporal complications of train spotting, nor even the mindlessly simple pursuit of writing down automobile license plate numbers, which I did myself for a while. A favourite venue was the front seat on the top deck of a trolleybus, where one could simultaneously pretend to drive and note the passing of the desultory, mostly black traffic. This boy, Master X, had reduced male pre-adolescent hobby mania to its essence, which is number, variety, and set. In this case, numbers are inherently variable, and any list of them will form a set. Yet, presuming his numbers were set under street names, apparently similar numbers were not identical, since 2 Waterproof Street, say, is manifestly not 2 Waterville Street. So every number was coloured by its geographical location. Perhaps in his book, numbers became things. Cigarette cards, bubblegum wrappers, barbed wire, spark plugs, hock, anything in the shape of a pig, gold ingots, pewter, traffic cones, beer cans, hypodermic syringes, clocks, rugs, rubber bands, dogs, lagondas, penny farthing bicycles, pennies, farthings, golf balls, billiard cues, Ming, stones, marbles, mirrors, constables, accordions, pocket watches, dinky toys, Meccano, rope, tobacco tins, hotel room sewing kits, airline sick bags, tulips, train tickets, electric torches, books of matches, postcards, phonographs, ballpoint pens, piranhas, dictionaries, handbells, thimbles, cameos, transistor radios, pressed flowers, Christmas cards, mangles, window glass, initialed handkerchiefs, tiles, bricks, autographs, celluloid film stock, movie stills, paper, inkwells, swords, pistols, anchors, fishing rods, carp. All these, and many more things beyond my ken, have been collected. Returning to the street directory and Ross's auction rooms, I note the various objects in the room where I am writing, which were purchased in auction rooms. The oak desk, the overmantel, the big deal table, the fire screen, the Hohner melodeon, the anonymous ukulele, the daguerreotype of brothers, water and place fell, the glazed chessboard set in a heavy moulded frame, the Lloyd loom chair, the pair of cobra-shaped brass candlesticks, the mahogany-framed Edwardian sofa, and the model aeroplane of heavy brazed aluminium, which looks as if it might be an apprentice piece from Short Brothers Aircraft Factory, whose nose is the face of a clock. It is twin-engined, so that the hands of the clock are like a third skewed prop, and it ticks away, ticks over. As adjusting my rough-scrawled holograph draft, I tick these words into the microchip self-justifying memory of my sharp FW560 font writer personal word processor. Thinking of the boy next door who had so much pocket money he could afford to burn his model aeroplanes. The three-piece suite, comprising a Chesterfield and 2 companion armchairs, was traditionally focused around the hearth so as to form a winter stockade, beyond which was Arctic lino. Within was a warm snug, where the fire threw flickering patterns over the bit of mesmerising Persian carpet. On the mantelpiece, besides the dead-centred analogue clock and the 2 mute china dogs, there'd be a brass letter rack in the shape of a turf cutter's donkey and cart, a souvenir of Galway, crammed with buff envelopes, a tin of Rinstead pastilles, a snowstorm featuring the Eiffel Tower, a pewter mug half filled with loose buttons, foreign coins and pencil stubs, etc. In lieu of television, we stared into the burning coals, dimly aware of the disembodied static voice of the Bakelite sunburst-grilled Art Deco radio, sometimes making our own sporadic conversation or listening to my father repeat a story for the 3rd time that week. At family rosary time, these circumstances would be overturned as we knelt down and dug our faces into the dulled velveteen cushions, trying to contemplate the mysteries without deviation, exploring the mental darkness in the interstices of the Chesterfield, feeling the posterior heat. Decades slipped through our fingers as the quarter hour of mantra dragged towards its terminus. Some years ago I inherited a nearly identical piece, its scuffed hide beginning to fray and split into hyphens between its regimented sentences of brass tacks. I was about to say carbon copy with its implication of shirt button-keyed manual typewriters, but the flimsy sheet itself that left blue smooches on your fingertips is wrong on this occasion. The Chesterfield came from Sanssouci Park, where I had shared a house with 3 peers. When we split up, as is the inevitable wont of 4 unmarried heterosexual male cohabitees, the furniture went different ways. I still have the utility oak bed, dressing table and wardrobe with its mirror Narnia door, a suite that I bought in a defunct auction rooms whose name I can't remember, but whose premises lay where the old Dublin Road toll house in Bradbury Place used to be. Its one low story was flanked by tall Victorian buildings, making it look like a tea-cosy cottage. Its threshold lay below pavement level, its lintel below head height, so that stooping into the imaginary room beyond, one could visualize the slow metronome of a pendulum clock, and a kitchen dresser with its orchestra of Delft, placated by the light of a Vermeer interior. The same calm brightness falls across the crinkles of a wall map, or pours like cream from the blue jug, as it dots the bodice buttons of the girl who is reading a letter. Gazing at this reproduction of a painting, we eavesdrop on its silent narrative, whose full story we will never know, since its rendering in salient places is deliberately illegible. What seem like pearls weighed on a minim scale are weightless blips of light. In my childish circumstances, the scroll-armed Chesterfield would sometimes become a flying machine, a hybrid of Verne's Clipper of the Clouds and Anderson's Flying Trunk. Crewed by 3 or 4 children, though one could manage it with ease, it made remarkable expeditions for such an ostensibly floor-bound item. We often flew to Turkey in it, and back in the space of a day, or less. We would always remember the sherbet fountains, the elaborate hubble-bubble pipes and refractory camels, the scent of kif and kumquats drowsing through the alleyways and cool arcades. When night came, suddenly as brushed mascara, we knew that it was time to leave. After describing some Immelmann turns and loop-the-loops, we'd return the vehicle safely to home base, gliding through the immaterial walls, hovering for an instant above the 4 cardinal points of its caster dents in the lino, before settling into them as if programmed. At any rate, the Sanssouci Chesterfield, no, settee is what it had become by then, became part of the furniture of the Bunaglow, where my wife Deirdre and I lived for 7 years. The Bunaglow is the gardener's cottage attached to Riddle Hall, formerly, according to the 1948 directory, a residence for women students at Queen's University. Miss Power Steele, resident warden. Miss Boyd, matron. Richard Chamberlain, gardener, and latterly the headquarters of the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, where, at the time of writing, I have worked for 21 years. In 1948, neither hall nor cottage were numbered. Some 30 years on, the post office designated the hall as 181A Stranmillis Road, and the cottage as the bungalow opposite 198 Stranmillis Road, occupied in 1948 by Miss V. Jolly. But the metathetic computer of the Northern Ireland Electricity Service addressed its bills to the Bunaglow, and it is still called that by us, in spite of a recent rationalisation whereby the Arts Council is 185 and the cottage 187. Bunaglow in English sounds like a brand of coal or anthracite. More interestingly, if accented on the last syllable, it can be exactly transliterated into Irish as Bunaglow, a phrase redolent with ambiguity, but almost impossible to translate. Bottom of the shapes is a possible interpretation, but not entirely satisfactory. Bun is a base, a bottom, foundation, but it can be extended in many ways, as elucidated by the Reverend Patrick S. Dineen in a full column of his marvellous Irish-English dictionary, new edition, 1927. To take some instances, Bun, established. Tá an teanga Bun, the language is alive. An madu rua mun na ghearc, the fox guarding the hens. Tiem na bhun, I set about doing it. Bun an urlar, the floor furthest from the fire. 3 tricks at cards. Bun ribba, a carbuncle or excrescence. Clo is a stamp, type, print, impression, as in the expression hon ganave an ach da chlo da nyocha gur tarav vahe. Though it was only the embryo, you could see it was a bull calf. Curina clo humpoiga, the expression of her face inviting a kiss. Bahanyavach clo, who was of entrancing beauty. And clo, the printing press. And clo is also the act of conquering, subjugation, destruction, defeat, variety, change. So, depending on context, Bunaglow can mean the origin of species, the establishment of stamps, the bottom line, a fount of images, an authority of peers, the arbiter of fashion, commander of the echelons, a bank of type, a metronome, the basics of taxonomy, the founder of a dynasty or sect, monotype, the genesis of embryos, platonic forms, the inspiration for a memoir, master of the roles, the original cliché, an impersonator or inventor, a minute book, the primum mobile, the foot of tributaries, the general post office, where they all hang out, an ABC, a catalogue, a tramline terminus, party lines, the cynosure of all eyes, the royal mint, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, where the buck stops, a tinderbox, Aladdin's lamp, a veritable Tower of Babel. In other words, a jungle. The Bunaglow lies within a unique suburban precinct of half-wild woodland and parkland made up of the grounds of the Arts Council, Stranmillis College, Queen's Elms Halls of Residence and Lennoxville House, formerly the residence of the Vice-Chancellor of Queen's University, comprising perhaps about 17 acres, give or take a few, but its microcosmic ecosystem is immeasurable. Here are badgers, foxes, rabbits, field mice, owls, glades packed with bluebells, entanglements of wild roses, rhododendrons, hawthorns, a little espaliered crabapple orchard, arbours, formal lawns, a derelict tennis court, 2 large ornamental ponds, formerly a principal source of water for the town of Belfast, mazy, mossy pathways, gravel walks and cobbled courtyards. There is one ancient knobbly oak, a survivor of the aboriginal forest of the Lagan Valley. Plunging off the track into the remnant woods, you get a whiff of what it must have been as your feet slide into the soft mulch and the fungal dead leaf aroma is cut by the diuretic tang of stinging nettles. The place is dense with whispering of insects and the noise of the leaves as they strive towards the light. Dryads murmur from within the trees and moths flit through the dappled moonshine, trembled by a zephyr. If you listen closely, you can hear the occasional swash of a car far away on a dark suburban road. And for an instant, you imagine yourself in the motor's cockpit, manipulating the big Mercedes emblem of the steering wheel, absorbing the luminous blips of its console as you drive full beam into the tunnel of the calibrated dark, observing the insignia of street names momentarily as you pass them, knowing the assignation will be met or not. Then with a rush you're back alone in the woods, where a night owl hoots like a muted car horn. Years passed in a wing beat. I shivered and decided to go back to where the Bunaglow lay, in its Hansel and Gretel dell at the end of a sylvan tunnel. I knew there'd still be a low glow in the fire. I imagined a man slumped in an armchair before it, thoughtfully smoking a pipe and rehearsing the story he'd tell me when I got in. Beyond our new estate lay the cow's field, its boundary marked by a tall electric pylon, protected by stories of barbed wire and skull and crossbones signs. When it rained, the pylon buzzed with intimations of mortality and suicide, and the cows would low and moan as they staggered up off their knees in an almost integrated body to find uncontaminated pastures on the margins of the force field. Years later, people would claim compensation for the cancers allegedly induced by these Eiffel Towers. South of the cow's field lay the jungle, demarcated on one side by the Owen Vara and on the other by the railings of Musgrave Park Hospital, which occupied a low plateau above the river, looking like a derelict RAF aerodrome with its rows of isolated Nissen huts, each one of which was a hospital ward. Making our way through the jungle, we were subliminally aware of this near necropolis above us and its empty gravel walks, whose order contradicted our meanderings. Although the jungle was a mere strip of riverbank some 10 or 15 yards across and some 400 long, a bonsai zone of low implicated scrub and thorn, we kept finding terra incognita in its labyrinth, or exploring different routes between known places. We saw them from a new perspective. Here were tiny glades carpeted with moss and microcosmic galaxies of flowers, pools in them sometimes, flickering with embryonic fish and water bugs, dense undergrowths of ferns, rank columns of umbellifers, and phalanxes of bulrushes. One loop of the river was almost completely ceilinged by overarching trees. This was a secret place of mine, where I would sit alone for hours on a miner's sandbank, studying the compass needle flickerings of dragonflies, entranced by the languid fish. Once I saw a kingfisher dive like a blue bolt through the clerestory of branches and break the surface water in an eye blink, before coming up almost instantaneously with a struggling silver flash in its beak. It was easy to imagine dim organ music in this miniature cathedral, where leafy bifurcations met and whispered in confessionals, allowing tremolos of light to penetrate its shades. I knew then that if ever I was on the run, an IRA man say, I could retreat here, to the heart of the jungle. Here would be my final or siege. Here I'd be absorbed and camouflaged, protected by its genius, with whom I'd long communed. Incorporated by its teeming ecosystem, I'd become a detail of its verdurous glooms and winding mossy ways, whose divarications and the roots and tributaries between them were innumerable. Yet others must have had the same idea. Scouting the territory, we would come across small clearings dotted by the charcoal interims of campfires, where important powwows had occurred throughout the long campaign of summer. Some of these we recognized as our own residue. Around others, still warm to the touch, we found scattered cigarette butts, evidence that others, older than us, had been here previously, and we felt a Crusoe wobble of fear, like when he saw a footstep on the sand of his supposed desert island. For we knew that the jungle was an intermediate ground, that it contained a demarcation between Catholic and Protestant territory, though where precisely this border might be, or where we might infract it, no one was prepared to say. No map delineated it. We were given no specific caveats against it by our parents, since, after all, they only knew the jungle by our non-committal reports. Yet we got osmotic rumours of the broader picture, where the Protestant majority might view our new estate as the tip of the iceberg of the Falls Road minority community, expanding under demographic pressure westwards into lush farmlands and the ornamental parks of planters' houses. Making our way westwards through the jungle, we felt the force field of home gradually diminish, till, its signal imperceptible, we were exposed like aliens on the margins of our known world. This point was marked by the hospital rubbish tip, which spilled down from its elevation in a cornucopia of dead flowers, bloodied bandages, Roman toga tumbling drapes of bed linen, disgorged orange rubber tubing and discarded hypodermics. Staggering up its scree, we were archaeologists of the avalanche, finding dead ever-ready batteries, rusted scalpels, odd shoes, crutches, Bakelite plugs. Once we disinterred a practically intact radio. We dreaded to imagine the hospital activity that lay behind this waste. The Frankenstein interiors of morgues and incubators palpitating with galvanic zigzag sparks. Contemplating these inner dimensions, we were also implicated in the wider landscape, finding new bearings and perspectives as the skyline of Black Mountain, a long mile or so to the north, shifted to accommodate our purposeful meanderings, whose river source lay in the mountain. The sky seemed bigger here. Unbalanced by it, we would get a dizzy, pleasurable tremor of agoraphobia. After a repast of campfire carbonized potatoes and scorched wood smoke perfumed toast, we would sprawl on our backs and gaze into the hemisphere above, seeing pictures in its lagooned archipelagos of moving cumulus and jigsaw puzzled sky. On rare cloudless days, it almost hurt to look into the huge blue levels, where the diamond point of a jet scored a silent white line, miles long, and amethyst became forget-me-not. A blue small-petalled flower grew abundantly in the nearby Seven Sisters meadow, so called, I presume, from that salient number of sally-rod trees in its March hedges, and we used to gather bouquets to decorate the altar of the Virgin Mary, whose plaster statue would be brought down on the 1st of May from the landing windowsill it usually occupied, to be placed on a special doily on top of the parlour sideboard, and flanked by these two ice cream sundae glasses filled with these blue mayflowers. This recalls the Belfast street tradition of the May Queen, where, as David Hammond writes in his Songs of Belfast, squads of children dressed up in women's dresses, high-heeled shoes and old lace curtains escort their own May Queen through the streets, flanked by two guards. They are furnished with a brush pole for the Queen's acrobatics and a tin can for collecting money. The encounters with rival queens are always exciting and vituperative. Modesty and restraint are not predominant features of the occasion. Indeed not. I remember the said child queens parading in their finery, and it would seem that their deportment and vocabulary owed much to the army of female linen workers, doffers, weavers, winders, tenters, rovers, spinners, drawers, peelers, who occupied the lower falls then, and whose rude, formidable presence scared me. They'd march out from the factories at foghorn closing time in linked arm chanting phalanxes, taking up the width of the road, and the desultory traffic of the time would have to draw to an important halt for them. Hearing the chant of their songs, I am brought back to David Hammond, who used to front a BBC Northern Ireland Home Service Schools programme, Singing Together, and I was convinced I could remember listening into it until I consulted my wife Deirdre, who tells me that she was listening to it when she was about 10 in 1965, when I was 17 and well outside the aegis of such recreational education, and hadn't met her yet and wouldn't for quite some time. So trying to think myself back into a room in St. Gall's public elementary school, I can see myself, my eye of memory hovering like a fly, at a scarred initial desk in junior or senior infants, as primary 1 and 2 were known then. It is 1954, the centenary of the proclamation of the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, and the May altar is especially elaborate this year, starred with many blue and white flowers. The big valve wireless with its confessional brass grill has just been switched on, and it makes a hum as it warms up in preparation for the coming programme. Putting my ear to it over the intervening decades, I can make out snatches of English folk songs through the temporal crackle and blips of passing Morse, rendered in a jolly, rumbustious fashion. As I went down by Strawberry Fair, singing, singing buttercups and daisies, as I went down by Strawberry Fair, fall-de-roll. and I would trip merrily along the gutter on my way home from school in time to it, not knowing as I do now that it was a sanitised bawdy ditty collected by notebook-wielding classical composers from beery Lincolnshire farm labourers, and really had no place in an Irish Catholic public elementary school. I do not think that we were allowed to listen to the radio very much, since the school was founded by the Frenchman Jean-Baptiste de La Salle and controlled by the de La Salle brothers, who were maintaining a discreet but effective profile in Ireland, and who would have been rightly suspicious of its received pronunciation Anglophone imperial ideals. But there was an ambiguous entropic time bomb of irony implicit in their calculations. Since one of the main aims of Catholic working class education of that British welfare state era was to teach us to be, if not priests or brothers or school teachers, potential employees of the imperial civil service, because knowledge was power. And if enough of us infiltrated the system might change in our favour. And it is said by some that the Northern Ireland Education Act of 1947, which guaranteed free secondary education for all denominations, was responsible for the onset of the current troubles, as the educated Catholic students of the 60s took to the streets to demand civil rights for all. And we all know what happened after that. Another pundit declared that the act had made potentially good carpenters and plumbers into bad poets. I still love the radio and the comfort of its disembodied voice. Often, insomniac during the writing of this book, scribbling memoranda to myself, I've tuned into the BBC World Service to overhear its missives to abroad, recalling an era when London, more importantly than Rome, was the hub of the universe, emanating authoritative spokes to its dominions. I hear it murmur as I write, and feel complicit with its now declining realm. I see a lit coronet of gas hissing under a blue kettle as it begins to whistle up a head of steam on top of the stove, as we called this domestic appliance, whose overhead rack was habitually draped with drying socks and drawers. An almost cool oven contained recently washed empty jars of various sizes for jam making, when a purple vat would simmer for hours and blackberry aromas lingered around the kitchen in their aftermath. I loved the warmed, clean glass jars, the long-handled aluminium ladle filling them with glop, the sacramental discs of waxed paper tamped onto the jam skim. Then a larger circumference of crimped-edged lid would be applied and bound by a rubber band. I would be allowed to stick on the dated labels. I recognise I have just indulged in some kind of transferred memory syndrome, whereby my mother's kitchen in 3 Moorland Drive gets blurred and shadowed, combining with the scullery of 3 O'Neill Street in the foxed mercury of a deteriorating mirror. I feel myself to be of baby length, crawling between my granny's slippers, sniffing their woolly baubles and the dust balls trembling on the cool linoleum. This had a trellis pattern, and my fingers could explore its avenues, alleyways and arbours for a small eternity of time. An enormous fractal space could be discerned within the microcosmic confines of O'Neill Street. Its ostensible plan, a kitchen room and a meagre scullery downstairs, 2 box bedrooms up, once examined, led to nook and cranny narrative regimes, whose focus was the hearth and its Dickensian component parts. The black, hob-accompanied cast iron grate, the conjugated poker, tongs, brush and shovel, the dented brass fender and its hinterland of tiles, fresh coals on the fire beginning to pout and bubble and spit, the tiles flickering with the same effect, the miniature Grecian urns embroidered on the two plinths which support the mantelpiece. The mantelpiece agog with ornaments, of which two at least have survived the demolition of O'Neill Street some 20 years ago. The first is a thimble holder carved from one bit of wood in the shape of a thumb-sized owl perched on a hollow tree stump. It is nicotined with age, but where it has been scuffed by accidental history, there are traces of a blonde wood that might be ash. I have it before me now, trying to return its quizzical gaze, for its eye beads of black resin have been slightly misaligned. Its ears have long since been knocked off, the scars worn smooth by generations of caressing thumbs and fingers. This owl was and is a small, powerful icon. Looking into the inkwell abyss of its thimble receptacle, I reimagine fairy tales in which such black holes are adits to an underworld, patrolled by speaking dogs. I remember in the Falls Park the scoop in the bole of a tree, which had acquired a mossy basin sometimes filled with rainwater, where I would conceal coins and come back to retrieve them weeks later. I knew then that no one else had stumbled on this portal to the universe, and only I had access to it. Then the gravel walks on which I ran back to my family assumed a grave significance of dance step patterns, which I tried to follow with my plimsoll footprints. I'd run faster, till I took off like an owl, and gliding low, I would intercept my shadow and tell it to slow down. The owl reminds me of his kinship to the bat, both night foragers, denizens of barns, attics, belfries, and hollow trees, of hieroglyphic deities, of how the apparition of the great white barn owl can be attributed to the banshee, how owls are general harbingers of doom, of harvest mice scurrying amid their cereal arcades, transfixed by a pair of searchlight eyes, of the time-bending oracular call of the owl. Walking into a kitchen house in Rowland Terrace in the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum, to give it its full title, I am returned to 3 O'Neill Street, even though the Rowland home has, since its relocation, lost its patina of being lived in, and buzz of conversations past. And though Rowland Street came from off Sandy Row, on the opposite side of Belfast's sectarian divide, I recognise its furniture and ornaments, the mantel clock, the dresser backed against the staircase, the Singer treadle sewing machine, which in O'Neill Street occupied a niche opposite the foot of the stairs, between the chimney breast and the yard window. The Singer looked like a prototype time machine in its shellac black gold-scrolled body armour and fitments of chromed steel chattering parts. For one pedal movement of the treadle, the seamstress got about 60 split seconds of stitches as she distributed the fabric of needle-punctured time away from her in piecework fashion. When not in use, the Singer was hidden from sight beneath its curved wooden cover that looked like a small catafalque or tabernacle on an altar. Yet one could still sense, within that dark interior, a darker, magnet-heavy, die-cast presence brooding in a must of gramophone machine oil. Deluxe models folded surreptitiously on greased hinges into a matrix of the table, and when the operator concealed the prostrate machine with a fitted panel, the whole console was transformed into a piece of furniture, a davenport, perhaps, or an occasional table with its case of dried flowers placed on a frilly doily. This is an engaging management of space, where the Singer is horizontally entombed between the table's laminates, like an Egyptian fossil. There's a hide-and-seek philosophy about it, reminding me that when I looked up Davenport, I wanted another word for writing desk, in Chambers' 20th Century Dictionary, I chanced on Davenport trick, an artifice by which a man can free himself from ropes wound round him and tied. The next 4 entries read, Davis apparatus, a device making possible escape from a crippled submarine, from the inventor. Davit, one of a pair of erections on a ship for lowering or hoisting a boat, from the name David. Davy, Davy lamp, the safety lamp used in coal mines invented by Sir Humphrey Davy, 1778 to 1829. Davy Jones, a sailor's familiar name for the malignant spirit of the sea, the devil. Davy Jones's locker, the sea, as the grave of men drowned at sea. Origin unknown. An inspired alphabetical sequence which gives the bones of an elaborate narrative, a Captain Nemo Houdini routine, where we visualize a globe-helmeted, leaden-booted figure in slow motion on the snowy TV screen ocean floor, bearing a flambeau, upwardly streaming, empty word bubbles. So I would sit in the submarine control space of the Singer, guiding it through cloudy grottos. Sometimes, as my attention wandered, I would find myself gazing upwards into the steep crook of the stairs instead, thinking of the coal hole underneath them, and how it is reached by way of the scullery, where I hear the boom of the stove being lit with one of those will-o'-the-wisp sparking devices. The coalman appears like Lucifer in a flash of clapped-out light, smelling of squibs, the whites of his eyes glaring from beneath his pharaonic headgear. There are white dots on his knuckles as he clutches the twisted ears of the black dead weight on his back. Reaching the scullery, he stoops into the portal of the coal-sack galaxy, undoes the ears and jettisons a tumbling load of fractured lumps. The slack, exhausted bag is taken back to the lorry, flopped down, and another, packed with knobbles, is taken in for deposition. Long after he had disappeared, the coalman's cloak of coal dust aura lingered in the silty air. The coalman and the sweep were kinsmen, alter egos allied in a carbon-burning life, whose eons' residue was furred impalpably within the chimney. Yet both were independent agents, and the sweep was a solitary genius, teetering on his slow high bicycle down foggy gaslit side streets, balancing the fasces of his trade on his right shoulder. Arriving at the venue, he would unroll his equipment and drape the fireplace with a pall. Operating in behind it like a blind man, he socketed a length of cane into the brush head, then another, feeling his way in integers of telescopic stalk. Arriving at the end of it, he'd ask us children to go out responsibly onto the street to check the apparition of the black chrysanthemum. Up, periscope! Now it is time for the lamplighter to make his rounds in the dusk. I used to see him from my bedroom window, propping his short ladder against the cold cast-iron pole, opening the Aladdin glass door, applying his taper. The gas lamp popped and flared, then steadied to a bright oasis. Across the city, lights came on in ones and ones, linked by subterranean realms of gas. I'm not quite asleep yet. My father sits on the bed. I feel his comfortable draped weight on me. He coughs, as if it were a prelude to a great orchestral concert, or a midnight mass, a fusillade before the quiet of the introit, then stubs out his cigarette and begins to tell a story. Back in the 50s, I'd look forward to October or November, when every other day smog would permeate and cloak the still dark morning streets with various murks of yellow. Outspan orange, saffron, Coleman's mustard, burnt sienna, honey, jaundice, lentil, nicotine. Snug in the lull between waking and getting up, I'd massage the cold tip of my nose, thinking of it being pressed against the opaque window pane. Outside, the habitual metronome of the blind man's cane was dulled and thickened by the intervening blanket as he made his way to work in the basket factory. His ticks were tocks, zigs became confused with zags, and I would savour with a slow advanced deliberation the prospect of my being lost on the way to school. After breakfast, muffled in my overcoat and balaclava, I would step into the incandescent wall of coal smoke smog. I'd inhale its acrid aura through my woolen mouthpiece. As I come onto the Falls Road, I try to visualise its shopfront sequence. Angelone's Ice Saloon, Muldoon's The Barbers, McPeak's Wallpaper, Radio and Drugs, Kavanagh's The Butchers, O'Kane's Funeral Parlour, Smith's The Tobaggonists, the haberdashery whose name I can't remember. I can't find it in the street directory for 1948 I've just perused, with its advertisements for defunct traders, John S. Brown, manufacturers of the celebrated Shamrock linens and hand-painted Raytone, double damask tablecloths and napkins, Wilson McBrien and Co., wholesale manufacturer of men's, youths and boys' garments, sole manufacturers of the famous Sunshine flannels, also the Captain, midi and sailor serges in all garments, and A.W. Hamilton, ship repairers, boilermakers, sole Ulster representative of the Shorey metallizing process, manufacturers of gates and railings, milk bottle crates, etc. It reminds me of those freezing February days when two of us are sent out into an opalescent fog to skid and skate across the black bottled glass rink of the granite yard. We are the milk collectors. The galvanized iron crate burns frostily into our palms and fingers. It clinks and tingles as we teeter back, the pair of us like out-of-sync zinc buckets on a milkmaid's swaying yoke. I step into the sudden fug of the glassroom radiator warmth. When we take the bottles out, they're frozen solid halfway down their half-pint length. We rack and clunk them up like snowman soldiers on the regimental cast iron pipes. Gradually, a sour-sweet thaw will blend its milk aroma with the other fug ingredients: chalk dust, pencil shavings, plasticine, sweaty socks, damp raincoats, school bag leather, ink, lino, blotting paper, oak and varnish, the interiors of pencil boxes, the exhalation of our breath against the De La Salle brothers' blackboard black soutane. Snow, too, is in the air. It will soon snow down like algebra. We will watch it crowd the window, then settle down to write in red and blue lined exercise books. We dip our steel-nibbed pens repeatedly into the speckly delf wells until our fingers become cramped and inked with blue. We copy out the alphabet, following the brothers' chalky copperplate. Years later, we would graduate to fountain pens: Parker, Conway, Stewart, Waterman. They had gold nibs and thick bakelite casings of Fabergé like mock tortoiseshell and pearloid, themed in various mosaics of blue or green or red. Meanwhile, all the motor cars were black. The last trams on the Shankill Road were blue as the Gallagher's blue cigarette packet, and their trolleys emitted ink-blot stars in the grey December afternoons. Buses were fire engine, doppelganger red. The conductor punches out the pink tuppenny ticket of Belfast Corporation Transport. Usually I'd climb into the smoke-fogged upper saloon and occupy its front seat and pretend to drive, revolving my imaginary wheel and gazing down into the stream of Fords and Humbers, bikes, milk carts, brewers' drays, linen emporia vans and mineral water lorries. I'd float, proud and high above it all, looking spaceman-like at these familiar, dinky aliens. Or sometimes, going on downtown expeditions with my mother, we would take the lower saloon, her faint rouge mingling with the red upholstered leather aroma. She would lean into me as the bus curved down the road, past Lemon Street and Peel Street, past Alma, Omer, Balaclava Street, until we disembarked at Castle Junction. Coming up to Christmas, 4 o'clock was nearly dark, and Royal Avenue was lit by tall, spaced light poles bearing glassy orchids of electric sapphire blue. The massive clock above the bank buildings shone like a Roman numeraled moon. Snow and tinsel glittered in the shop windows. Salt crystals crackled under our feet. I was most impressed by Robertson and Cleaver's window display, where an impossibly talented mechano-boffin had constructed a platonic model of a working windmill the height of a 9-year-old boy. I would pause with my nose pressed against the cool glass and admire this complicated paradigm of engineering with its berry red and holly green components. 4 or 5 mechano revolutions of the windmill sails went by before my mother gently dragged me off. Robinson and Cleaver's big revolving brass-lined doors engaged us with a faint pneumatic hush as we were swept into the foyer. Such occasions would necessitate a haircut. After pondering the revolving mystery of the barber's pole, where did the candy stripes come from? Where did they go? I would go in and sit on the bench to wait my turn, reading the cardboard advertisements for Brill cream, styptic pencils, and 7 o'clock razor blades, and wondering what they did with the hair shearings at the end of the day. I'd imagine franchises with wig and mattress manufacturers. Or not. Mattresses were horsehair. It reminded me that when you rounded the corner from Muldoon's and walked up Durham Street, across the Boyne Bridge into Sandy Row, you'd see red-coated King Billy on his white horse prancing in the Boyne of a gable wall. I'd wonder if his long scrolled auburn locks were wig or hair. Now I'm staring at my head without a torso, my hands invisible and paralysed beneath the barber's nylon shroud. I try not to wince as the cold die-cast metal clippers snip and snag my ears and raw neck. He asks me my name and where I go to school, as if he were a mirrored Grand Inquisitor, compiling the denominations of the parish. I'm about to answer when he throws a jolt of freezing oil into the top of my skull. Then he violently kneads my head, before he calms and draws a plumb line parting on my cranium with a sharp steel comb. Come spring, I knew my father and I would climb Black Mountain, panting up the broken limestone, cold stream pouring pathway from the White Rock Road, up into the airmail tissue paper sky of Easter, far above the city. When we'd attained the celestial summit, we'd sit down on the undulating heather, and he'd light up a Park Drive cigarette and point it towards the various details of the urban map spread out below. The biggest shipyard in the world, the biggest rope works, the green cupola of the city hall, the biggest linen mill, Clonard Monastery, Gallagher's tobacco factory, my school, the GPO, and in between the internecine regimental terraces of houses and the sprawled city-wide armada of tall mill funnels writing diagonals of smoke across the telescopic clarity of our vision. I could see the colour-coded curbs of Union Jack and Tricolour. I saw my tiny self appearing at the front door of 100 Raglan Street, staring up through the absolutely smogless air into all the ambiguities of blue. Virgin Mary, denim, boiler-suited, Prussian, Rangers, Oceanic, Irish Sea, Atlantic, Gallagher's and Esso. I saw the petrol rainbow of an April shower and vanished into it, contemplating how I would get lost en route to school. These memories were initially set down as a preface to a book of images, Belfast Frescoes, by the Belfast artist John Kindness. My original brief was not to write about them, but to respond to them from my own angle. John is a Protestant and I'm a Catholic, but our Belfasts correspond, and we used to have great crack together in Belfast folk clubs in the late 60s. Each panel is underwritten by a brief commentary in careful schoolboy calligraphic roundhand, like the one I used for writing up my stamp collection. And each panel has a frieze. Both adumbrate the main subject in a playful and ironic commentary. For example, if you draw on a page with lemon juice or milk, it is invisible until you hold it in front of the electric fire and it goes brown. The boy artist Kindness is wearing a grey shirt, maroon and grey striped tie, rust-coloured Fair Isle sleeveless sweater, grey knee socks with maroon and green knee bands. He is seated on a too-low stool at a knee-height desk, pen poised above a blank page resting on its surface, which also bears a lemon and a small glass tumbler. Reading from left to right are the following. A page torn from a spiral-bound jotter on which we can make out these words, written in sepia longhand. Robin Hood shot a nude riding through the glen. He told Friar Tuck to run like... My memory of this children's risque ditty is somewhat different. The verse I know, a parody of the theme song of the TV Robin Hood serial of that time, goes, Robin Hood saw a nude riding through the glen. Friar Tuck run like folk to warn the merry men. When they got there, Maid Marian was bare, and Robin Hood was in the nude. Two halves of a cut lemon, an italic nibbed stationer's pen with moiré blue handle, a scrap of paper on which is sketched a childish embrowned female nude, another tumbler of water, a metal foil co-op milk bottle cap, and a 1-bar red electric fire with a blue fabric-covered flex snaking up to terminate in a brown Bakelite plug and wall socket. It is appropriate that Kindness in these works has taken slate as his ground material. Not only slate, but actual roofing slates. You can see the nail holes in the corners. Since Belfast was as comprehensively roofed with that material as it was built of brick. On stormy days, slates would fly from the roofs. If we had to venture outside, we were warned to stay well into the walls, lest we be decapitated, and broken slates had several uses. They could be written on and with, and short lengths could be fashioned into castanets, or Stone Age knives and scrapers. It was good to be inside on such nights, as the whirlwind fife and drum ensemble of the storm crepitated overhead, and you thought of the stars being driven out of their courses. Wind whistled down the chimney, disturbing the glowing coals, making them flare and pop, echoing the atmospheric wheeps and sigmas of the Clydesdale wireless as we tried to tune in to the weather. I'm dreaming below the dome of the Belfast Central Library, imagining its radii of knowledge streaming out to the smaller branch libraries, Falls, Ormeau, Shankill, Donegal Road, Tullycarnet, The dome like the focus of a pulsar or a flying saucer, emitting radio beacon light rays. I feel the whole thing ready to tremble, lift, and slip off into outer space to wander in dark forever through the incandescent galaxies. I wake to the drowsed aroma of a wino sitting next to me, his nose slumped in a volume of Encyclopedia Britannica. Libraries attract crazies and eccentrics who wander the circle of the reading desks, coughing chronically, twitching with staccato tics. I recognize one by his elastoplast patched left lens. I used to see him often in the neighbourhood of Botany, moving rapidly through the crowded alleyways, writing agitatedly in a black flip-back notebook. I've never caught his one good eye, but once, glancing sidelong as I tried to hurry past him, I got a brief glimpse of his open page, crabbed with uninterpretable symbols. Yet another has his left sleeve pinned in a habitual Napoleon pose, his right hand poised for an imaginary sword. Or at the request desk, I often bump into the bespectacled youth who has placed an order for Mein Kampf. The hiccup man is not far behind. In the library, nobody is what they seem. Ostensible normals will try to slip you a tract printed in a typeface full of question marks and bullet points. I have before me a particularly interesting example proclaiming the Church of Retrospective Predestination. Have you been born yet? Its headline reads. The text is backed up by several authoritative quotes such as, and the rest of the acts of Hezekiah and all his might, and how he made a pool and a conduit, and brought water unto the city, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? Kings 20:21. Or, thine eyes did see my substance, yet being imperfect, and in the book all my members were written, which in my continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. Psalms 139:16. The basic tenet of this sect is that only by looking back at our lives can we make sense of them. As we chart their many déjà vu and unexpected nexuses. And sometimes I find myself on the verge of subscribing to it, especially in the course of writing this book, which I cannot read until I've written it. In this context, I recall an entry in Samuel Taylor Coleridge's notebooks, where high on laudanum he is writing by candlelight and is convinced that the words appear on the page by their own volition. All his quill does is follow them. I remember writing the quote on the blank side of a blue Belfast Central Library requisition slip, but I cannot put my hand on it now. How many episodes have thus slipped into the province of the unwritten shadow to this one? Notes on beer mats, Rizla paper packets, sales slips, envelopes and bookies' dockets, quotes on post-its, tax bills, tracts, receipts and bus tickets, memoranda byroed on the back of my hand, addenda scrawled on shopping lists and business cards, and books of matches, directions for a future not yet written and which might never be. And yet these lost incunabula must still have a function, an intimate hand-to-brain recording loop connection similar to the automatic pilot digits of musicians, which remember patterns inaccessible to normal thought. I often get up from bed in the early hours and go downstairs to the kitchen to scribble down some insomniac inspiration for this book, and vividly remember it in the morning just because I'd written it. I've no need to go back to the actual chronicle. Why, you might ask, don't I have a notebook by my bed like a dream diary? It seems to me the journey downstairs is a necessary one. It is a process of refinement, palpable on the soles of my bare feet as they experience the various textural frisons on the way. The coarse weave bedside durry, the cool black-painted floorboards, then the prickly Hessian landing and stair carpet, consequently the faux marble dining room lino, and finally the freezing kitchen tiles. Phrases can be shaped by that declension and my chronic inability to find my slippers, lost as they are in the dark, dust-balled purgatory under the bed, their gasping mouths bereft of feet. Trying to think of all the shoes I've ever worn, I feel an instep ache of memory, stepping into my father's huge, impassive brogues and their cold, puckered insole ridges, running my fingers over their braille wingtip upper punctuations. From time to time it would occur to me that the shoes could be submarines, inching in tandem pedal movement over the convoluted seabed of the Persian hearthrug. I would man them with injection-moulded toy soldiers, sailors unaccountably being unobtainable, and depth charge them from my Gulliver perspective with empty cotton reels. This latter item made a useful tank when you tractor notched its twin rims with a penknife and constructed a driving mechanism from a thick elastic band drawn through its core and attached to a pencil stub. You wound it up like clockwork and watched it crawl across the casualties you'd strewn on the Persian battlefield, some taken out of action by the die-cast, spring-loaded metal cannon and its matchstick ammunition. Yet the lethal matchstick was also a perfect first-aid splint for a veteran decapitated lead soldier, as you inserted it into his neck cavity and impaled the disembodied head on the match head, thus recalling 18th century executions. These were the then ubiquitous Swift matches produced by Maguire and Patterson at their impressive block-long Ulster matchworks on the Donegal Road, some 400 or 500 yards up from the Star Factory. I still think of the powerful crosstown northwest axis formed by the matchworks and Gallagher's tobacco, cigarette and snuff manufacturers at 134 to 148 York Street, which were, according to my father, the most extensive premises of their kind in the world. There's something intoxicating or mesmeric about a matchbox as you shake it to hear its maraca complement of 50, which, when you slide open its drawer, appears like a phalanx of still sentinels. Amateur craftsmen used to assemble complicated cabinets or sewing repertoires from empty matchboxes. Magic tricks were performed with them. Slotted one into another, they became a goods train involved in some important skirmish. Children were notorious for detaching the sandpaper striking strip and pleasurably sucking it for its spunky, gluey crunch. They used to lick the bulbous redheads too, deliberately mistaking them for cherry lips, a small, loose wine gum type of sweet once very popular. These were dispensed from open trays and scooped into serrated-edged, hand-sized paper bags, wherein they used to stick promiscuously together, and you'd enjoy dislodging them, introducing them in ones into your mouth and kissing them until they melted. My father sometimes manufactured candy in domestic portions, boiling up Demerara sugar and butter in a saucepan, letting it seethe and reduce before glopping it onto a flat greased tray, all the while singing sotto voce. This old man, he had a horse-alum, had a horse-alum, had a horse-alum. This old man, he had a horse-alum down in Demerara. Sometimes he'd butter his palms and wind the still warm malleable candy into a rope, which he'd snip with my mother's dressmaker's scissors into humbugs. These made a passable imitation of Callard and Bowser's rum and butter toffees, to which I was addicted for their initially indomitable rock hardness. Impossible to chew as vulcanite until you rolled one in your oral cavity for hours, feeling its clunk against your teeth and gums. At last, able to masticate it, you could clamp it in a dental matrix, thereby making conversation useless. Major fillings were lost this way. Now their silvery amalgam puts me in mind of mercury, or of soldered electrical components, or the miniature radios which spies were reputed to have built into a hollow tooth, together with a bullet point of cyanide, which was bitten into when the game was up. My first extraction was by gas at the tooth clinic in Academy Street. The apprentice dentist inserted a rubber bit between my teeth and put a black protuberance over my nose. Years later, in the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum, I would re-encounter this disguise in the shape of an antique airman's oxygen mask, as I took it from the dummy's face and breathed into it. That tang of fear, the sudden slope away from things, the smell of a pilot light as the air goes gas flame Bunsen burner blue, like the onset of a migraine as you fall or fly into the deep. And the dentist's chair has become an ejector seat in which its decrepit khaki occupant reclines like Tutankhamun. Under the influence of gas, I flew to ancient Egypt. There I met similar Daedalus and masters of a zodiac cryptology, whose complex pyramid and pylon architecture was a wonder of the world, especially when spied on from a flying boat, and one perceived its wiring diagrams of constellations, or the lights of vast Los Angeles, firefly millions of amoeba blips in contraflows on freeways. I get that same buzz driving home from Aldergrove Airport, as I, descending from the Antrim Plateau, take the high curve of the Horseshoe Bend and look out from the corner of my right eye into the panorama of illuminated Belfast, my metropolis. Sometime in the 60s, my mother decided to convert the loft, a broad triangular prism volume of dark beneath the roof. An odd-job man wired it, and he devised a cunning, steep, right-angled staircase up into it, and he laid a floor on the joists, put a window in the gable. He put up batten and plywood dado-height walls to make a nave of the space, with two enclosed prismed aisles on either side, above the eaves, and he put in sliding doors through which you hunkered to gain access to its lumber gloom. Inside, in a game of hide-and-seek, you experienced a tea-chest musk. The dulled platonic outlines of cardboard boxes came to hand. Rummaging the interior of one, you'd discover the shape of a shoe among the bric-a-brac of elephant bookends, wicker-handled tea trays, and discarded lampshades. Then, when your eyes became accustomed to the light, you found there were broken chinks of light at the edge of the eaves, and the dotted rivets of the water tank were buttons of light. The converted loft was my bedroom for several years. Relatively heavy objects, defying normal gravity, were wont to float up into it. Even the family book cabinet, which lodged itself against the party gable wall, like a high altar under a triangular ceiling canopy. The cabinet comprised a bookcase screwed into the top of a writing bureau. The bookcase had 3 shelves and 2 leaded glass doors. The bureau had 3 drawers beneath a 45-degree angled flap. When you opened it, 2 synchronized green baize-covered armatures slid out from concealed sockets to support the flap, whose obverse was the ink-stained leather-covered surface of a writing desk. Consequently, pigeonholes and smaller drawers were revealed within, crammed with fraying correspondences and dog-eared family snaps. arcades in a Lilliputian Byzantium, smelling of faded ink and the gum of postage stamps. I opened the flap again in my mind and composed myself like an express postal worker on an antiquated night mail train, assigning letters to their destinations like an automatic pilot. Swaying with practiced ease against the lurch of the carriage, as a long white rope of smoke unfurls from the snort of the locomotive chattering through the dark, past sleeping villages and backyard pigeon lofts and conurbations, under aqueducts and viaducts and into tunnels. Alternatively, the cabinet could be an organ console, but mostly it behaved as a writing desk, and it was here that I first began to write in the late 60s and early 70s. I kept a kind of journal then in a 13 by 8 unruled notebook with marbled end papers that I got from a friend's father who worked in Her Majesty's stationery office. I haven't thought about it for years, but now that I've remembered, it's stored in a drawer of the desk I'm writing at. I bring it out, flick through it, experience again the embarrassment I felt when last I looked at it. But one of the less embarrassing entries seems germane to this present sequence of explorations. 5th of June, 1970. Such strange dreams I had last night. My sleep seemed an unbroken story in dream, a strange story unfolding in the night, linked by images of death and injury. At one stage I knew I was dead. I was a skeleton wrapped in a black rustling shroud. My friends walked with me and knew I was dead. I came back to life. Somehow my skeleton disappeared, absorbed into flesh again, scarred flesh. My legs were broken and stitched together. My left knee was a mass of cracks and hardened blood. I wish I could remember it all clearly. There was some coherent pattern to the train of events. One thing I do remember now, a tram which led you back into the past. It was a sort of excursion. You paid a few shillings and the tram moved off, supported apparently by thin air. As it moved, the scene around slowly shifted and altered through past time. There were only 3 passengers, myself and 2 girls. I can't remember who they were. I knew them slightly. Much of this scene took place around Milltown, I think. I think this was inspired by a notice for city bus tours I read yesterday. Or perhaps it was today. A lot of today's events link with last night's dream in an odd metaphysical way. Death, injury, the tram journeying to the past and future inextricably mixed. The tram is also an extension of the recurrent dream I have had since a child. It always differs a good deal, but the basic elements remain the same. The red bus I can never catch. And today, before it occurred to me that I might quote myself of 27 years ago, I happened to be in Smithfield. Not the much-loved Victorian-covered market, which was destroyed by firebombs on the 6th of May 1974, but the sadly pale replacement for it, built in 1986-7. There, in a second-hand bookshop, I bought the little pamphlet I have before me, number 67 in Ben's Sixpenny Library series. I paid £1 for it. Architecture, by the nicely named Christian Barman. I had opened it at this passage, which links urban space and dreams. It goes, long before the bankers of Lombard Street were the bankers of Lombardy, from whom that street takes its name. And there was also in northern Italy that other street, the great street in general, of whose existence the people, as they wandered round the outside of their churches, were gradually becoming aware. This discovery of the street was the first step in the progress of the new architecture, to which the name of Renaissance has been given, and it is in Italy that it was first made. The truth is that during the preceding centuries, the street had been so far overlooked that it could hardly be said to exist at all. It was just a hole in the town, like the hole in the hub of a wheel extolled by the Chinese philosopher. It was a very important hole, yet no one ever troubled to look at it. The churches and surrounding houses were observed, and between them there was just space, straight or crooked inlets from that greater space that lapped the sun and stars. In architecture, the movement known as the Renaissance is principally the discovery of the walls of these inlets. In its way, it was at least as great a discovery in architecture as the discovery of the unconscious mind in modern psychology. And appropriately, one of my recurrent dreams of Belfast focuses on streets dominated by a church, St. Peter's Pro-Cathedral in the Lower Falls. Looking at it on the Ordnance Survey Plan of 1931, a modern map would not show the demolished streets or versions of them in which the dream takes place. I note how the church is like the hub of a crooked wheel, with streets bounding it and radiating from it. Alexander, Derby, Milford, Ardmullen, Irwin, Acre, Masserine, Scotch, Bow, English, Cinnamon. Completed in the neo-Gothic style in 1866, the church occupies what looks like medieval space, although the streets do not exist by virtue of its presence, as they would have done in medieval times. Their raison d'etre is to house the workers in the spinning mills and foundries that made Belfast a once great city. In my dream, St. Peter's has acquired a piazza, sometimes wet and empty, save for a scattering of cobblestone grey strutting pigeons, sometimes packed with the stalls, booths and awnings of an open-air market, where the conflicting litanies of dealers' cries are rained on by the mewing of the seagulls wheeling overhead, and the air is laden with the scent of oranges and herrings. The buildings fronting onto this confabulation are eclectic. Chelsea Townhouse, Glasgow Tenement, Venetian Palazzo, Oxford booksellers with compass windows, Amsterdam tall house overlooking its reflection in the water, Belfast grocer's corner shop, Parisian boutique, New York diner, Dublin pub, New York deli, Warsaw synagogue, Berlin brothel, Bolognese haberdashers in an arcade, Delhi shirt shop, Beijing tea emporium, Havana humidor, Vienna cafe, San Francisco oyster bar, Copenhagen doll's house outlet, Chicago kosher butchers, Dieppe wine merchants, Los Angeles 30 automobile showroom, Carson City drive-in movie theatre, Constantinople kiosk, Byzantine bazaar booth, Buenos Aires private library, the workshop for the blind on the Shankill Road, the Alexandria Memory Institute, Santiago copper shop, Lonely gasoline pump of Intercourse, North Carolina, Vladivostok ice store, Tokyo shoe shop, Kyoto temple, Laredo saloon, Kufra Oasis drinking fountain, Mumble's ice cream parlour, Roundstone cartographers, Newmarket bookmakers, the Boston Aquarium, Cork picture framers, and ubiquitous McDonald's. Of course, not all of the buildings on this menu appear simultaneously in any one version of the dream, but the space they occupy accommodates more than would appear feasible, and they are liable to mutate as the dream progresses, depending on what route you take through it. And the facades of the grand piazza will be different every time you enter it. The weather, too, can be very changeable, shifting from blustery showers to sunny calms in minutes, and rainbows occur frequently, reminding me of the interior of St. Peter's, where stained glass shadows tremble on the marble embrasures of windows. I often enter the church for shelter, usually arriving in the middle of an elaborate ceremony whose function I only dimly know. But this does not entirely matter. since the participants, moving in a cloud of ritual and incense, are oblivious to the other goings-on which take place in the lobby area, immediately between the porch and nave. Here are whispering dealers in holy pictures and indulgences, little men in long black Crombie overcoats, some displaying their wares on cinema ice cream girl trays, others with interior pockets sheathed with luridly printed tracts. Here you can purchase little brass glass-faced reliquaries that look like toy compasses, about the diameter of an old florin, with a florid acanthus leaf circumference. They contain a splinter of the true cross, or a smidgen of linen snipped from the shroud of a saint, and feel surprisingly heavy for all their small size in your hand. The more authentic of them cost about 10 florins. Meanwhile, sextets of shawled women walk in rounds, intoning interweaving rosaries, and a bawling baby is being baptized at the nearby font. 4 men are playing cards in the shadow of a confessional. 14 genuflectors follow the Stations of the Cross. Individuals are lighting candles at the many side shrines, their faces momentarily illuminated by them. Others, entering this imminence, dip their fingertips into the necessary stoups of holy water, feeling its cold kiss on their foreheads as they bless themselves. An unseen organist manipulates his stops of Voix Céleste and Vox Humana in a reverie of practice, climbing and descending scales of meditation, moving from funereal to hymnal mode in the space of a bar, allowing himself almost deliberate mistakes so as not to make them again on the important occasions in his diary of engagements. Leaving the church, I walk down Milford Street, take a right at Macmillan's Place, again a right at Durham Street, to find myself in Barrack Street, looking at my alma mater, St. Mary's Christian Brothers Grammar School. It is sometime in the 60s. The stark reality of the Star Factory is, on the face of it, more humdrum than the stories it has inspired. Located at 322 Donegal Road, between the streets of Nubia and Sudan, it is noted in the 1948 directory as a boys' clothing manufacturers. But mention of its product summons up what seems, at this far remove, an antiquated, arcane world, where Reebok is not a sportswear label, but the kind of antelope you might see depicted on a South African stamp. I have from this era a fully clothed vision of tweed suits, V-necked sleeveless woolen pullovers, floppy collared flannel shirts, snake clasp belts, and elasticated braces, whose slide adjusting mechanism sometimes cut into your collarbone. I sometimes think I still bear the consequence of knee-length socks, their ribbed garter scars. One could write a mini treatise on the Liberty bodice, defined by Chambers' Dictionary as an undergarment like a vest, formerly often worn by children, whose name always struck me as an oxymoron, given its life jacket, straitjacket shape, its dotted joins of rubber buttons and blanket-stitched seams. In order to corroborate my memory of such clothing, I have resorted to my allotment of the family photographs, which I keep in an old wooden flute box with 2 brass hook and eye catches. I thumb them open and riffle through the sheaf of snaps. Holidays, first communions, or those inconsequential, important moments when one poses for the newly acquired box camera of a childless, better-off uncle. Here is my confirmation photograph, which shows me at about the age of 8. The sacrament, then, was taken shortly after one had attained the use of reason, long defined by the Jesuits as 7. It would be 1956. There are, in fact, 2 of us. Perhaps this was an austerity measure. a photographer's special 2 for the price of 1 deal, Roy McLaughlin and myself. In the left foreground, a pine table has been sanctified by a clean white tablecloth and a crucifix placed on it, supported by a glass jug. I have been arranged to stand almost dead centre with my right hand brushing the cloth. Roy, being half a head taller, is behind me at my left shoulder, in the position usually attributed to royal consorts. A makeshift shrine is poised on the dado rail of the wainscot immediately behind. A Madonna and Child, flanked symmetrically by 2 unlit candles in glass candlesticks and 2 slender tulip vases holding sprays of mayflowers. The improvised piety of the occasion shows in our wide-eyed faces and uncertain smiles. Our embryonic adult suits are manifestly new and stiff. 3-button jackets, it was de rigueur to fasten only the middle button, with wide lapels. Short trousers. His is serge, mine is tweed. Every time I smell tweed, I get a whiff of that other era, or further back to the First Communion. This was a nubbly Donegal suit, whereas the confirmation was a fine houndstooth. Yet as I think about it, the aroma is generic, not specific, since one tweed summons up all other tweeds in a kind of domino effect. One would have thought that each tweed would emanate its own charisma, like Scotch malts with their local attributes of peat and heather, their different waters. So the brand of sheep, the type of chlorophyll it grazes on, the weather, flecks of this and that, the dark interior of crofters' handloom cottages, all these must leave their redolent imprint. Each bolt of cloth must be a web of DNA strands, and a trained dog could sniff one from another. But we cannot. Or maybe not that we cannot, we just don't. One can admit the possibility of white-coated hierophants with flared nostrils, the perfumers of tweed, mulling over dribs and drabs like tea or whiskey blenders. But no, smell is not a primary function of tweed, albeit a powerful one, which links moments of non sequitur in a time-evading narrative, as the last time reminds you of the first. And long olfactory shadows trail behind you like the remnants of a ticker-tape parade along the floors of canyon avenues in Manhattan, where, on a cold St. Patrick's Day, swaying, saffron-kilted, tweed-jacketed pipe bands tread ponderously by as light snowflakes fall. The drum major calls a lull. Its sudden woof reminds me of the silence of a schoolyard when everyone is in, or when an annual photograph is being taken. This one, lying on the table where I'm writing, shows the class of 1958, I think, tiered on the 5 broad steps between upper and lower yards. Imagining their dimensions again, I begin to see St. Gall's Public Elementary School in all its different facets, adits, grades, corridors and stairwells, classrooms fogged with radiator heat and the steam from damp gabardines. There's a map of Ireland on one wall. On another, pinned to the display board, a diagram of the soul, an amorphous white blob with a black cancerous dot of mortal sin in it, and some grey venial smudges. Here also are our maps of how we got to school, which were that morning's exercise. Our teacher, wearing his didactic hat, uses them as illustration to a principle of spiritual convergence, pointing out our different crooked radii. If you laid them one on top of another, they would form a predetermined black star. What future detours have these pupils taken since? I travel my eye back to the yard steps. Our arms are folded, like footballers, as we gaze into the lens of then. Looking at these boys' faces, I can recognize them, but I barely remember half of their 33 names. I no longer see them now, apart from Roy of the confirmation, who occasionally swims into my ken in after-office drinking confraternities in offbeat venues like the Elephant or the Fly. On these premises, chance encounters seem fortuitous or retrospectively predestined. We connect in asterisks or nodes, node being, among other related concepts, a point at which a curve cuts itself and through which more than one tangent to the curve can be drawn. Wandering through the mazy city, we also miss each other many more times, for our arrangements are not filofaxed nor prior. When we do meet, we wonder when we last met in this haze of alcohol. Lonely on a high stool, half expecting a companion, the onset of a friendly argument, you stare into the whiskey mirror or at the rank of spirit-level bubbled optics and contemplate their upside-down connected bottles with their labels printed right way up. You peruse the intersecting circles made by the base of your glass on the bar. You read the ashtray and stub out another cigarette into its brand name. Kelly's Cellars, though relatively famous, was another favourite haunt. It was said to have a ghost, dictated, I suppose, by its antiquity and the whispered palimpsests of centuries of conversations. Kelly's is in Bank Street, formerly Bank Lane, which runs on one side of the long-since culverted Farset. And it is a moot point as to whether bank refers to the river, or to the Provincial Bank of Ireland on its left bank, or to the vast emporium of the bank buildings across the street from the bank. Formerly, again, it was known as Bryce's Lane, then as Crooked Lane, or as the back of the river. It connects Chapel Lane with Castle Place, which borders on Royal Avenue, built on the demolished Hercules Lane, commemorated by the Hercules Bar, on the corner of Chapel Lane and Castle Street. The castle itself has been well described by Marcus Patten in his meticulous and comprehensive Central Belfast, a historical gazetteer. Kelly's, with its low black oak counter and its apparent plethora of snugs and nooks and crannies, its wainscoted, whitewashed walls, its pendulous pendulum clock, its open fireplace murmuring with glowing slack, could be a relic of that former ambience. It is the oldest surviving public house in the city, says Patten, still retaining something of the atmosphere of the heady days when the United Irishmen plotted here, and Henry Joy McCracken crouched under the bar to escape pursuing redcoats. Souvenirs stored at the cellars include the big key of the old Smithfield jail and an elephant's tooth. I occasionally return to Kelly's. I like to sit there in an early evening lull when one can contemplate the plethora of bric-a-brac arranged on shelves, in niches and in alcoves, willow pattern, delft, dented brass half-gallon jugs, japanned tin boxes, guns, pictures, statuettes, a framed football team with folded arms and centre-shaded brill-creamed hair is hung immediately below the unreachable top shelf with its bottles variously full of rarely tasted, curious liquors and defunct brands of whisky. Were they to exchange their hooped shirts for long white aprons, the footballers would appear perfect barmen. Both trades share the collective team, realised as you watch the bar staff move into action on a jam-packed Friday night, confronted by a four-deep rank of eager punters brandishing big notes and tic-tac fingers. Professional barmen have served their time at making time. They show no stress under pressure. Their peripheral, fish-eye lens vision enables them to see everything at once and know the order of its precedence. Moving rapidly, yet languidly, seeming many-armed and ambidextrous as they simultaneously pour 3 pints of stout, strip the cellophane off a pack of cigarettes, while negotiating a Bacardi and Coke and 3 rums and black, and tallying the cost in advance. They still go to the inner, publicly unheard, relaxed tick of the wall clock. After a flurry of orders, they stand before the reredos like priests in a zone of free time, gazing into public space at the anticipated future. It was in Kelly's that I drank my first pint of Guinness, not quite pleasurably amazed by its texture of thick black yeasty milk. And it was here that I was initiated into the ritual of going half-jarred to midnight mass. St. Mary's in Chapel Lane was just a short stagger up the street. Here, dazed by chanted Latin, incense, alcohol and candlelight, I felt myself an 8-year-old clothed by the Star Factory, barely kept from sleep by the coldness of my crisp, snowy cotton Christmas shirt, as I fingered its plastic collar cartilages in their stitched slots. In the late 60s, there was a succession of jobs to be taken between school or university terms. Being the son of a postman, a word would be put in for me at Christmas time, and I'd join the temporary army of the Royal Mail. In spring, there'd be work on building sites, labouring with tipsy barrows over the muck and sky-reflecting April puddles on narrow causeways of thick plank, wheeling the load up a precarious ramp onto the flimsy wooden deck of a hoist. When it started its cranky, juddering ascent, driven by a footing, cloud-emitting diesel donkey engine, you glimpsed daylight between the boards. I worked for a summer or two in McWater's bakery at 125 to 133 Cromick Street in the Markets area. This was one of the many great bread manufactories to be found in Belfast at the time, whose economies seemed to depend on a traffic of casual labour, badly paid, I dare say, though it did not seem so to me at the time. And I still remember the thrill of receiving the weekly pay packet, which had a clever slot that enabled you to tally the crisp notes before you broke its seal. There was a transparent window for the loose coins. When not working nights, I'd sometimes be hired by day as a cleaner, for a lot of Augean work needed to be done around McWater's. One such assignment was the cleaning out of number 3 Flower Loft, which lay in a high remote annex of the factory and had been disused for years. Here ancient flour was drifted up the honeycomb walls of the chamber, and as we shovelled into it, thousands of dormant moths, grey-backed shellicky slivers of things, teemed into life and flight, swarming confusedly about our hands and eyebrows in a flitting pandemonium. Then we were given insecticidal spray guns with bicycle pump action handles to enable us to zap the enemy, killing scores with a single squirt of drizzle. We'd rustle their fallen carcasses into empty hundredweight bags. Here too we discovered caches of old lading bills, dockets and receipts, corroborated by near-pristine Georgian postage stamps, overwritten with elaborate copperplate signatures. And I wondered how they'd got there from the Victorian wooden panelled office, whose bay window viewed the big cobbled roofed yard at ground level, where the delivery vans and bread service carts drew up to be serviced at loading bays. It occupied an interesting dimension, since it ran at a slant between Cromick Street and Joy Street. Consulting the 1948 directory, I see that numbers 90 to 102 Joy Street are designated as the back entrance to the bakery, and note in passing that there are at least 3 Carsons in the street. John at number 9, James at number 53, and Miss Jenny at number 86. All possible relatives of mine within this pretty Catholic enclave, since my father's father's father, a Protestant cabinet maker from Ballymena who turned Tague when he came to Belfast looking for work and took Catholic wives, had sired a family of 22, 13 by the first before she died, and 9 by the second. So my father told me on my wedding day, but I confess I have not gone to the bother of looking up the ramifications of this family tree. The white limbo of number 3 loft put me in mind of other work, like that in Ross's Lemonade Factory, ginger ale, aerated and mineral water manufacturers, to give it its full title. Here, in a high attic space, we were assigned one of those pointless tasks designed by prisoners of a work ethic, in which the appearance of work must be maintained, even when there's no work to be done. We were to shift a huge accumulation of old bottles from one side of the room to another. Regarding their profuse confusion, we wondered what principle of taxonomy might be applied to them, whether to sort them by colour, size, design, or apparent age. In the end, we contrived an ornate tableau inspired by chaotic principles, where as we clunked and chinked them together in glassy rhymes, each juxtaposition suggested the next link, and interlocking snowflake patterns became evident, for we burnished the bottles as we worked. Then, through the broad high attic skylight, a glancing ray of April sunshine, momentarily solid, with dust motes drifting in it, like the souls of moths, would illuminate the whole ornate array, twinkling its myriad glints of blue and green and clear and amber, till it looked like a starship armada riding at anchor in the coal-sack nebula, or a downtown Christmas tree composed of its own innumerable baubles of glass. And for a second I thought I detected a whiff of Norwegian fir in the high back room, as if green needles of it had been strewn on the pine boards of the floor. It brought me back again to the Christmas post of Christmas past, and the sorting office of the General Post Office, where the legions of the city were divided into centuries, and ranks of pigeonholes contained in upright forms. The high-ceilinged atmosphere was silted with a redolence of faded ink, gum, twine and rubber bands, illuminated by the technicoloured smell of stamps glimpsed on covers, accumulated and distributed. Agate, beast, carmine, deep blue, plum, purple, lilac, dull vermilion, milky blue, pale buff, orange, cobalt, slate, mauve, deep grey, deep red-brown, pale yellow-green, magenta, bright magenta, lemon, ochre, green, turquoise, Prussian blue, pale violet, rose red, chestnut. Most of these bore the head of the Queen of the British Commonwealth of Nations, so it was a nice momentary pleasure to come across a bit of correspondence from French India, Curaçao, Chile, Achath, Iceland, or the Vatican. Once, some 30 years ago, I discovered a letter lodged in a forgotten crevice at the back of a pigeonhole, addressed to Belfast, Maine, USA, and postmarked 9th of October 1948. It bore one of the Irish Republic airmail issues of that year, featuring the Angel Victor flying over various pilgrimage locations. The 1D chocolate over the Rock of Cashel, the 3D blue over Loch Gerg, the 6D magenta over Croagh Patrick, and the 1 shilling green over Glendalough. In all of these, the angel, in a series of dramatic Superman poses, fills most of the available sky and carries a banner bearing the slogan Vox Hibernia in Roman capitals. The names of the comparatively small places depicted below are given, of course, in Irish in a stylised Art Nouveau half-uncial Gaelic script. Trying to remember or visualise the value of the Belfast main stamp, I am baffled. But it occurs to me now that back in 1967, I indulged a momentary fantasy of Victor over Clonard Monastery, encompassing the whole of Belfast with his carrier pigeon's aquiline angelic wings, recording all its architecture in the pupil black orbs of his aerial Dresden vision. 2 up, 1 down terraced houses, shipyards, spinning mills, tobacco manufactories, tram depots, pubs, chapels, churches, ropeworks, barracks, corner shops, arcaded markets, railway stations, graving docks, cinemas, post offices and photographic studios. Much of it vanished now into the maw of time, but still remnant in the memory of denizens and pilgrims like myself, and still extant in my father's mind. When he comes home from work, he stoops over me with the slack, enormous canvas bag at his paunch and allows me to undo the thick tan leather straps from their glinting, squeaky buckles. I plunge my head into the replicated coarse weave gloom within, breathing its ample folds and crumples of absented correspondences. I detect a whiff of caramel or cinnamon behind it all, or clove rock, suggestive nuggets of them stuck together in a quarter-pound bag with its serrated paper lips scrunched and twisted and sealed. Or the smell and glint of a bottle of Ross's lemonade or sarsaparilla with its opaque screwed glass stopper, the metallic resonance of a small tin toy. Even when it is devoid of presence, I can discover in my father's bag a residue of string and thick brown rubber bands, the occasional stamp that has strayed from its envelope. Now he's stretched out sleeping on the sofa because he'd worked the night shift before the morning walk. I take off his peaked cap and lose my head within its big dark crown. I get a chair to stand on to reach his coat from the hook on the back of the kitchen door. I drape myself within an amplitude of sleeve, cool linings that extend away beyond my fingertips, as the tail of the jacket reaches nearly to my heels or insteps and sometimes skims the floor. I've remembered to sling the empty weight of the bag around me, feeling its hard leather strap cut into my left collarbone, for I've taken off my sandals and I've put my feet into my father's huge shoes, relishing their cold pilgrim insole contours that were formed by him before me. I stagger in them around the floor as he sleeps. I deliver important messages within this universe of room. His hands are clasped on his chest as he snores, and his nicotine fingers twitch in concert with his lips, which silently rehearse the story he's to tell me later on that night. It's that night now. Like a boy with a Halloween sparkler, he draws on the dark with a lit cigarette. The words are ghosted from his mouth in plumes and wisps of smoke as I hold his free hand to guide him through the story, and we walk its underworld again.
That was Stephen Rea reading from The Star Factory by Ciaran Carson, published by the Head of Zeus.